Today's story will include several potentially triggering topics, and viewer discretion is advised. The artist's story is perhaps one of the most tragic out of all the DVD characters. Despite a childhood permeated by deep pain and loss, she sought to use her gifts and abilities to fight tyranny and bring justice for the oppressed. So how did someone like this transform into one of the most terrifying and deadly creatures roaming the entity's realms? This is the story of the artist. Growing up, Carmina was surrounded by beauty. The landscapes of her coastal village in southern Chile provided constant inspiration for her art. In between sketching and painting, she would regularly feed the crows that had made their home in a tree next to hers. But her childhood was not as picturesque as her art would make it seem. Early in her life, her mother had abandoned her family suddenly. Well, that's not exactly the full story. Her mother did leave her father, but in the process, she attempted to take Carmina and her little brother, Matias, with her. On the way, their car was ambushed by men working for her father. They rammed their car off the road, broke the windows, and pulled both Matias and Carmina out, and then threw them into the back of two waiting trucks. Her mother desperately attempted to use her car against their attackers, but a third truck hit her once more as the others drove off with Carmina and her brother. That would be the last time she would see her mother. Her father blamed Carmina for it all. Rather than exercising any semblance of self-reflection, her father shifted the blame on her as a scapegoat for what he felt, which made the pain she felt from losing her mom so much worse. In the void left by her mother's presence, still a child herself, Carmina became the maternal caretaker for her little brother, Matias. But all that responsibility was too much to place upon a young child. One day, Carmina was outside with Matias. She was busy painting while he played near her feet. Their father was also nearby, lost in thought as he sipped away at a beer. The phone rang and Carmina went inside to answer it. The call only lasted a few seconds and she immediately returned to the yard. But in that short time, Matias had disappeared. Panicked, she asked her father if he had seen her brother, but her father couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the boy. She then searched everywhere for him, shouting his name as she went. The concern within her grew as she approached the creek near their house and spotted Matias's jacket floating in the water. Desperately, she dove into the creek and found him, but it was too late. He had evidently fallen in the creek and drowned. The pain of her scream tore through the peaceful quiet of the day. Her father, shaken out of his indifference by the sound of her cries, came to find her, still by the creek, holding Matias's lifeless body. Angrily, he wrenched her brother's body from her and walked off, leaving her sobbing uncontrollably by the stream. Consumed by her grief, she barely noticed the murder of crows that had surrounded her on the shore. Having already blamed her for her mother's abandonment, of course, her dad would also blame her for her brother's death. Still a child and with no one to help her process, it's understandable that she would also blame herself for what had happened to her brother. As time passed, the day of Matias's birthday arrived. The emotional pain of this day was too much for Carmina. She could no longer find beauty in life without Matias. Still a child, she had now lost both her mother and her brother. The art that had been the outlet for her to express the deepest emotions she felt no longer held any meaning. She had lost everything good in her life and believed her father's lies, that it was all her fault. So on this darkest of days, she made her way to the bridge nearby that towered over a rocky and dangerous river. She took one last look at the river below and closed her eyes, uttering the words, "See you soon, Matias." But before she could act, she was startled by the sounds of cawing echoing all around her. Her eyes opened to the sight of a black mass moving towards her, and as it got closer, the sleek crows split apart and landed all around her, one of which landed on her shoulder, looking directly into her eyes. She loosened her grip on the bridge's railing, and the crows once again erupted in a symphony of distressed caws. At first, she was confused. But quickly it became clear that these crows were concerned for her safety. As strange as it was, for the first time since losing her brother, Carmina didn't feel alone anymore. This was enough for her to back away and return home. The crows didn't go with her, but she felt confident that they would be back should anything bad happen to her. Shortly after, she would run away from her father, sneaking onto a small shipping boat while she was supposed to be at school. This time, she escaped successfully, and she found her way to an art school in the city that her mother had once spoken of. There she met one of her mother's old professors. He immediately recognized her as Pia's daughter and agreed to mentor her, despite her being too young to officially attend the school. She found a home near the school, living together with several art students, a group committed to helping each other grow in their artistic abilities. Everything that she had experienced was enough to rekindle her love for art, and she set to painting what had happened with a heavy use of black ink. The process would help her hone her signature style, which consisted of black ink surrealist art. Over time, she would add in some color, expanding her style. And as she grew, she began using her art to stand up to the injustices that she witnessed all around her, painting murals of local tragedies and using poetry to expose the suffering of the innocent. Her creative protests could not be ignored, shining a light in the dark areas of the city that those in power wished to keep hidden. When she performed, among her audience, she would see the crows that had rescued her years earlier. Her art and vision for change in their society inspired other painters around her, and out of that launched what became known as the large-scale surrealist movement. The extra fame attracted the attention of a multinational group known as the VAC label, and they commissioned her to paint a mural. You see, there was a supernatural power behind Carmina's art. She had the ability to see into another dimension and paint what she saw, which explains why she would see and hear the crows when others wouldn't. She'd eventually learn that her mother had also possessed this same gift. What she didn't know was her mother was still alive and had been trying to contact her, but the organization had been intercepting her letters. They knew of their gifted abilities and feared that together they would expose their plans to sacrifice the world to their ancient god. So they made it their goal to control Carmina. Sensing that something wasn't quite right about this group, Carmina did her homework and discovered that they had a reputation for gifting commissioned art to shady government workers, and the artists they hired would conveniently disappear soon after. She saw this as another opportunity to expose corruption, and so she accepted their offer, intent on revealing the dark side of the group. When the day came for her to paint their mural, she set to work, crafting a depiction of their logo as a surreal Grim Reaper preying upon Chilean families. Dressed in theatrical garb, stitched together with a poem of revolution, Carmina worked furiously. Her plan initially worked, and locals began debating about corruption. However, this also caused the VAC label to target her. Now in real danger, Carmina sought refuge in an unlikely place, her father's house, gathering together with her closest friends to seek safety. But what she didn't know was that the VAC label had been paying her father to keep tabs on her all along. That same night, masked men broke into the house, taking them all captive, and dragged each of them to a van waiting nearby. Carmina awoke in the desert, her hands and feet tied to a chair. Strewn around her were her friends, each of them tied up as well and unconscious. She knew she couldn't do anything to help them. A hooded figure approached her, dressed in a ceremonial robe, casting a shadow on her face that contrasted with the glaring desert sun. In his hands, he held a silver blade that shimmered in the daylight. Taking her hands, he began to chant in a language she did not recognize. She refused to look away from him. Without warning, he stopped the chant and, taking the knife, cut off both her hands. With an arrogant laugh, he taunted her, "How are you gonna paint now?" Her screams of pain, both physical and emotional, woke her unconscious friends. The horrible act did nothing to extinguish the fire that burned within her, however. Instead, it fueled it. She screamed defiant obscenities at him through the pain as she struggled against the ropes that still held her ankles. The hooded man grabbed her chin in an attempt to regain control, and she promptly spat in his face. Angered, he grabbed her head, pried open her mouth, and cut out her tongue. "How are you going to recite poems now?" he jeered as she screamed in agony. Carmina was overwhelmed. Between the severe physical pain and the visceral feelings of rage, grief, and loss, she realized that not only had she lost the most important people to her, but now also the only way she had to cope with that loss. As her screams cut through the dry desert air, the sky darkened as the sun was obscured by black clouds. From these dark clouds, black feathers began to rain down. These weren't clouds at all, but a monstrous horde of crows descending upon the horrifying scene. The collective sound of their cawing became piercing as they swarmed the hooded man without mercy. Carmina couldn't help but smile through the pain as she watched the man be torn to shreds by her protectors. It was as if her art was coming to life before her eyes. But as the crows finished doling out their punishment on the hooded man, they would not settle. Carmina watched in horror as they turned their bloodthirsty attention to her friends, who still lay on the ground around her. unable to move to defend themselves. She cried out as the massive crows slowly devoured her friends where they were, their screams echoing through the hot desert air. Her loved ones were once again dying, and it was all her fault. Pain gave way to rage, and as that rage took hold, her eyes glazed over with darkness. A deep, black fog began to emanate from her feet at the desert floor, consuming her entirely. The cause of the crows and the screams of her friends slowly became more and more distant, as if she was moving away from them. Eventually, the fog cleared, and she was now surrounded by a supernatural world that mimicked her own, but shrouded in an intense darkness. She barely noticed that she was no longer bound to the chair in the desert, because her attention was locked on the strange and inky substance emanating out from her wrists, where her hands used to be, and dripping from her mouth, where her tongue once was. Suddenly, she felt her head twitch to the side, like a bird watching its surroundings. The supernatural crows that once watched over her now empowered her. Filled with pain and rage, she stalked this new strange world, dealing her vengeance upon any who crossed her path. How she transformed from someone who fought injustice to such a bloodthirsty creature isn't exactly clear. Perhaps she could no longer distinguish those that she came across from the cultists who'd taken everything from her and her family. What we do know is that Carmina Mora was no longer who she once was. She now stalks the realms that she once painted, her screams echoing through the cold, damp air, inducing fear in those desperately trying to survive. If you enjoyed this video, a rating down below really does help me out. Thank you for watching, and thank you to our channel members for their support of the channel. As always, you're awesome, stay awesome, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.